February. On the first day of Friday of February, my father missed Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News because he was spending almost the whole day getting ready for the formal presentation of the Chamber of Commerce Businessman of 1967 award at the Kiwanis Club that night. Actually, we were all spending a lot of time getting ready for the Kiwanis Club because my mother and sister were wearing long gowns, and my father and I were wearing tuxedos, which are uncomfortable and don't fit right and come with shoes made for people with very wide feet. My sister had used most of the getting ready time to complain, especially about the stupid purple orchid that the Kiwanis Club had sent and which she had to pin to her shoulder. It didn't help when I pointed out that I had to wear a white carnation in my lapel and that wearing a purple orchid wasn't nearly as bad. And it really didn't help when I pointed out that I had to wear white feathers on my butt and that wearing a purple orchid really wasn't as bad as that. And it really, really didn't help when my father pointed out that she had wanted to be a flower child, and so here was her chance. "You don't take anything I believe seriously, do you?" she said to him. "Tie your hair back from your face," he said. She went upstairs to the bathroom to tie her hair back from her face. I went up after her. "You should take the orchid and flush it down the toilet," I said. She looked at me. "Why don't you take your carnation and flush it down the toilet?" "Maybe I will." She pointed to the toilet. "Go ahead." But I didn't have to flush my carnation down the toilet, because right then a whole series of low chords sounded from the piano in the perfect living room below us, followed by a roar and crash as the entire newly plastered ceiling fell, smashing down the top of the baby grand piano, ripping the plastic scat cushions, flattening the fake tropical flowers, tearing the gleaming mirror from the wall, and spreading its glittering shards onto the floor, where they mixed with the dank wet plaster that immediately began to settle into the carpet to stain it forever. All four of us stood in the hall, the sickly smell of mold in our nostrils. If the committee that chose the Chamber of Commerce Businessman of 1967 had heard what my father had to say about the carpenters and plasterers who'd come to fix our living room ceiling, they might not have given him the award, since one of the requirements was that the nominee had to support the general business atmosphere of the town. And my red-faced father, who was hollering and swearing about how he was going to decrease the number of town's businesses by 2, and he was shredding his white carnation as he said this, which is probably what Shylock would have done if he had been wearing a white carnation after being cheated out of his ducats. It was a good thing that neither the carpenters nor the plasterers were at the Kiwanis Club that night. We drove there in silence, and just before we walked into the club, I took off my carnation and handed it to my father. He took it without a word, and while my mother pinned it to his lapel, I held my flowerless lapel out to my sister and smirked. She smiled back very sweetly. Then as soon as we had gotten inside, she excused herself, went into the ladies' room, and came back without her orchid. She was still smiling sweetly when she leaned down to me and whispered, "Down the toilet, you little jerk." So we were both flowerless as we went into the reception hall, but no one would have seen the flowers anyway, since the hall was so dark. The only light came from the candles on the tables, the lit ends of cigarettes, and the lamps at the head table, which shone off the fake paneling on the wall behind. My father sat up there, and the rest of us sat below him at a center table with the wives of the Kiwanis Club officers. My mother refused an offered cigarette. I could tell this wasn't easy. And then she chattered to the Kiwanis' wives while my sister and I sat silently through the dinner, roast beef and mashed potatoes and buttered lima beans, and through dessert, lemon meringue pie with a whole lot more meringue than lemon, and through the opening greetings and speeches, and then through my father's speech of grateful acceptance. He was still red in the face when he got up to speak, and you could tell he was looking out at the audience for the carpenters and plasterers. But he made it through without any hollering and swearing, and everyone clapped when he talked about the growing business opportunities of the town, and how he was glad to be a part of it all, and how someday he hoped to leave a thriving and prosperous business in a thriving and prosperous town to his son to carry on the good name of Hood and Associates. Lots of clapping at this. When everyone at the head table looked down at me, I smiled and nodded like I was supposed to, since I'm the son who is going to inherit Hood and Associates. My sister kicked me under our table. Toads, beetles, bats. When we got home that night, my father phoned the carpenters and the plasterers. He told them that he didn't care that it was late on a Friday night, and he didn't care that tomorrow was a Saturday. They had better be at the house first thing in the morning, ready to fix the ceiling permanently and to offer restitution for the property damage their carelessness had caused. They were there first thing in the morning. If I had had anything to say about it, which of course I didn't, I would have had the carpenters and plasterers head over to Camillo Junior High as soon as they were done with the perfect living room. because the ceiling in our classroom was getting to be a bigger and bigger problem as the weeks went by, and Mr. Goreshi and Mr. Vendleri couldn't trap, poison, snag, snare, net, corner, maim, coax, or convince the rats to give themselves up. 8 asbestos ceiling tiles had started to bulge down, which meant that either Sycorax and Caliban were getting fatter or the ceiling was getting weaker. Every morning, Mrs. Baker looked up at the bulges to inspect them, and every morning she looked a little more nervous. So suppose she looks up there and sees that they've chewed a hole in the tiles, and they're looking back down at her. What happens then? I said to Danny. You know that sound the bus driver made just before she hit you? I remembered the sound. It wasn't anything compared to what Mrs. Baker would do. We waited hopefully, but the 8 bulging tiles stayed intact. At the beginning of February, Mrs. Baker had assigned me Romeo and Juliet. I read it in 3 nights. Let me tell you, these two wouldn't make it very far in Camillo Junior High. Never mind that Romeo wears tights, at least according to the pictures, but he just isn't very smart. And Juliet isn't too strong in that department either. I mean, a potion to almost kill you? She drinks a potion to almost kill you. Who would drink a potion to almost kill you? Then Romeo goes ahead and drinks a potion that will kill you, because he can't figure out that she'd only had a potion that almost kills you. And then Juliet, who is at least smart enough to figure out that Romeo really is dead, makes sure that she uses a knife this time, which is not almost going to kill you, but really will kill you. Doesn't this sound like something that 2 people who can't find their way around the block would get themselves into? Of course it does. Mrs. Baker couldn't see this problem at all, because she's a teacher and no teacher ever does. Didn't you find it tragic and beautiful and lovely? She asked me when I told her I'd finished reading it. See? Not really, I said. What did you find it then? Stupid. There we have an opinion that overturns 375 years of critical appreciation. Is there a particular reason that you find it stupid? Because they never would have done what they did. Fall in love? All the stuff at the end. The poison and the knife, she said? Yes, they never would have done that. Mrs. Baker considered this for a moment. What would they have done? Gone to Mantua together. And their parents? Ignored them. I'm not sure that life is quite as simple as that. These are star-crossed lovers. Their fate is not in their own hands. They have to do what has already been decided for them. That's why it's so tragic and beautiful and lovely. You see, tragic and beautiful and lovely again. Why not just stupid and dumb? Mary Lee thought it was wonderful that I was reading Romeo and Juliet, since having been inspired by the Long Island Shakespeare Company's holiday extravaganza, she was reading it too. Don't you think it's romantic, Holling? I guess so. And you're reading it just before Valentine's Day. Yeah. The most romantic day of the year. Don't you love the balcony scene? She clasped her hands and held them beneath her chin. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Merrily, let's go somewhere together for Valentine's Day. I turned around to look behind me, because someone else must have said what just popped out of my mouth. What? Said Merrily. I was still trying to figure out how that popped out. I think it must have been because Mrs. Baker and her Shakespeare is expressing something about what it means to be a human being, and the tragic and beautiful and lovely routine. It had all gotten into the air and mixed together, and the first thing you know, after you start breathing that stuff, you say things like what I said to Mary Lee. But what could I do now? So I said it again. Let's go somewhere for Valentine's Day. She put her hand on her hip and thought for a moment. Then, no, she said. This, in case you're missing it, is the tragic part. Why not? I said. Because you called me a blind mole, and then you acted like a jerk about your father winning the Baker Sporting Emporium contract. That was 3 months ago, and I did not act like a jerk. You still called me a blind mole and hoped, let me see if I can get this right. You hoped that an unwholesome dew from a wicked fin would drop on me. It was actually wicked dew from an unwholesome fin, but I'm a lot smarter than Romeo, and I know when to shut up. Now here comes the lovely part. Merrily, I said, there lies more peril in thine eye than 20 of their swords. Look thou but sweet. 20 of whose swords? It's Shakespeare, I said. It doesn't have to make sense. They just have to be words more beautiful than have ever been written. So mole and blind are 2 words more beautiful than have ever been written? Had I it written, I would tear the word. Merrily smiled. All right, she said, I'll go. I told you it was the lovely part. Even though I still can't figure out how those words popped out of my mouth. That night I sat through supper trying to decide where I could take Mary Lee on an allowance that I had to string together for 3 weeks just to get some cream puffs. There was a moment, this will tell you how desperate I was, when I thought I might ask Mr. Goldman about another play. But it might be Romeo and Juliet, and that would mean even more tights. And not for the whole wide world was I going to wear tights again. So I asked my mother, Where could I take someone with $3.78? The supper table quieted. Well, she said, I suppose for an ice cream cone. It's February, I said. Then maybe to Woolworth's for a hamburger and a Coke. Woolworth's. She shrugged, and then to a movie afterward. My mother was not a powerful at arithmetic. Who are you taking? Asked my father. Marilee. Marilee who? Marilee Kowalski. Marilee Kowalski, the daughter of Paul Kowalski of Kowalski and Associates? I guess, I said. He laughed. You better hurry. Why hurry? If Hood and Associates get the junior high school contract, and we intend to, then Kowalski and Associates may very well be no more. He laughed again. Take her to Woolworth's, said my sister. Really? Really. Then she'll know you're a cheapskate and dump you after the first date. If you think that saving someone's life is all it's cracked up to be, and that the savvy should swear eternal loyalty and gratitude to the saver, you don't know the part about the savee if she has a picture of her buttocks published in the Hometown Chronicle, has no further obligations to the saver. If my father was sounding more arrogant than usual, it's because he had brought home a scale model of his design for the new junior high school, and he figured it was a winner. And looking at it sitting on the dining room sideboard where all the silver had been pushed to the edges to make room for it, I thought he might be right. No pillars, he pointed out, no brickwork, no symmetrical layout. Everything was to be new and modern. So there were curved corners and curved walls. The roof was a swing of domes all made out of glass. They arched over the main lobby, the gym, and clusters of science and art classrooms. When I pointed out that the building wasn't square, he pointed out that this was 1968 after all, and times were changing. Architecture should change too. He pushed back his chair, walked over the model, and took off its top half. Look at this interior, he said. Open hallways that rise 3 stories to the domes. Every classroom looks out into sunlit space. No one's ever come up with that concept for a junior high school before.